Clune's Booktown Festival is a celebration of the book, filled with bookstalls, author talks, workshops and thought-provoking conversations in the historic Victorian township of Clunes.
I'm really lucky today to be able to talk here with Helen Garner. She's the author of 16 books of fiction, essays and reportage, including Monkey Grip, The Children's Bark, The First Stone, True Stories, The Spare Room, This House of Grief, as well as 3 collections of her diaries, and now a new book, The Season. Different readers will, of course, have different thoughts and feelings as they go through this book, but I do think most readers will experience it as extraordinarily well written. This is a reminder of the oddly simple fact that to write a better book, you have to choose better words several thousand times, and Helen Garner chooses better words. Better, not in the sense of higher or refined, but more apt, a more accurate use of all our language, from the delicate to the vernacular to the satisfyingly crude. And when you read her books, I think you do have a sense of being carried, strongly held. And so we are able to take some harder news about what we are, what our lives are actually like. It's not an exaggeration to say that this kind of really unusual literary competence holds more life, gives us more life. And this is so rare. And she's been doing it for more than 40 years. So please welcome here today, Helen Garner. We thought we'd start today just with a couple of readings from the book, just to give you an idea of sort of what it covers, the scope of what it does.
These were picked by Sean, and I was really pleased that they're ones that I like too. I don't think there's any here that's really embarrassing. I'll let you be the judge of that. This is really the opening paragraph of the book. I pull up at the curb. I love this park they train in. I must have walked a figure of 8 round its ovals hundreds of times at dawn, in winter and summer, to throw the ball for Dozer, our red heeler. But he's buried now in the backyard, under the crepe myrtle near the chook pen. The boy jumps out with his footy and trots away, bouncing it. Boy, look at him. He's been playing with our suburban club since he was a tubby little 8-year-old. I've never paid more than token attention to his sporting life. But this year he's in the under-16s. The shoulders on him. He must be almost 6 feet tall. He's the youngest of my 3 grandchildren. The last, and there will be no more. At breakfast time I say, "Can I start coming to your training?" "What? Why?" "I don't know. I've got no work. I'm burnt out. I don't know what to do with myself. I need something to write about." "You better ask the coach." "Who's the coach?" "We've got a new one. It's Archie." "What? The Archie we know? Isn't he only a boy? How old is he?" "About 20, says Amby's mum, who remembers important facts. "Can you be a coach when you're only 5 years older than the players?" Boys are gathering slowly on the oval. Where am I going to put myself with my brand new notebook hidden in the back pocket of my overalls? There are no seats. Wait, there's one, near the goalposts and the water bubbler at the western end, a big old-fashioned park bench made of thick wooden slats. When I sit on it, the metal boundary rail cuts straight across my line of vision. I hoist myself up onto the high, curved back of the bench and perch there, looking around. This is the inner west. The air is full of a low metallic noise. 20 metres behind me, skateboarders are gliding up and down their steep curves of concrete. Suburban trains clatter back and forth along the southern edge of the park. On the other side of the raised railway track lies a vast tunnel excavation and construction site. Earth-moving behemoths roll ponderously. Men march about in high-vis and helmets. Beyond the site rise the blocky tops of many coloured containers, the odd crane. An ambulance siren wails past, coming up from the river. What the hell am I doing here? These gaps are skipping forward, right, according to... The team's former coach is playing kick-to-kick behind the goals with a much smaller boy. His bare-legged 4-year-old daughter, in a grubby black and white striped cotton dress, rushes to a goalpost and goes swarming up its padded section like a monkey, hauling herself, gripping the spongy white sheath with her knees and toes. She perches there, 8 feet from the ground, gazing about in triumph, her fair curls standing up in a crest. A man in a black business suit and tie, very straight-backed and correct, goes sailing past beneath her on a scooter, oblivious. Stuck home with COVID. Lying under the doona, reading, dozing, reading again, forgetting everything I've read. After 2 weeks, I emerge negative and drive to the cafe, pick up the Age, turn to the sports pages. A photo, Buddy Franklin leaving the field with his arm across the shoulders of a teammate after Sunday's match, which his team, the Sydney Swans, has lost to Collingwood. Collingwood is at the top of the ladder, Swans at 11. And the Collingwood crowd booed Buddy Franklin, a hero of the game, a dancing god of the game in his last season. Franklin is 36, battle-hardened. His face in this photo is calm, composed, but is also as soft as a boy's. It's a wounded face with that wiped look of someone who's copped a ringing slap across the cheek. All his expression lines are gone. In my fortnight of isolation, I must have lost a couple of skins. I shock myself by bursting into tears. I turn a page and find a Collingwood member who says he did boo, but realises in hindsight that it was a mistake. I booed, he said, because everyone else booed. The Guardian doesn't hold back. It's about the internalised hatred that men, who are the dominant force in shaping and sustaining AFL culture, have for themselves and each other. The great Southern and Ponsford stands merely provide a haven for the boozed up, brittle and broken to project their own self-hatred and insecurities onto others. Unquote. Actually, my whole book is an attempt to invert that statement. But I have a lawyer friend in Sydney who worked for several years at the Royal Commission into institutional child abuse. The only way she could bear the work without cracking up, she says, was to go back to playing the piano, which she was once good at but had abandoned when she went into the law. She bought a fat book of Mozart's keyboard music, and when she came home each evening, sickened and weary, she would sit down and work her way through a sonata. I tell her what I'm trying to write about. We've been approached, she tells me, to support many men in Melbourne who were sexually abused as children within football clubs. We've had no luck engaging with the higher echelons of Victorian football. Do you want to learn more? No, I don't. What a fool I am, I think, stumping home from Pilates, to idealise the game, depicting it as a Homeric struggle full of noble, manly customs and ethical training for teenage boys. And now I'm told that it's corrupted, shot through with evil, just like everything else in this world. Why the hell am I shocked? How could it be otherwise? It's a bloody institution, and this is planet Earth. Why don't I keep my mouth shut when people ask me what I'm writing? I'm surprised by how many people jump to the conclusion that it's something polemical, a critical study of football culture and its place in society, informative, analytical, statistical. Really, I'm trying to write about footy and my grandson and me, about boys at dusk, a little life hymn, a poem, a record of a season we are spending together before he turns into a man and I die. Wait, I think this is the last bit. This is right towards the end. The under-16 parents and siblings and aunts and uncles and grandparents and schoolmates and girlfriends are faithfully rolling up, forming into nervy circles near the boundary, craning their necks towards the pavilion in which the two teams are secluded in their separate chambers, preparing themselves for battle. The building is teeming with boys and men running importantly up and down and in and out. There's a tense, low hum. I fight my way up the stairs. The door to the visitors' room is shut, but I can hear the Colts. The Colts is the name of my grandson's team. But I can hear the Colts' muffled cries. Archie, the coach, is conferring in the hallway with Silas, their heads together, their backs to me, the boy pleading, the coach intent. I shouldn't be here. I brake behind them, just close enough to hear Silas say earnestly, I'm on today, Arch. I promise. Keep me forward. I bolt towards the stairs. A colt's father goes steaming past me. Boof's up there, he shouts. Boof's back. Down on the grass, Boof's dad, who can't stop laughing, spots my notebook and says, don't forget to put in the dads who fly their sons home from Darwin. Fitzy's dad, the GP and trainer, walks briskly past us, carrying in one hand a light metal frame with cloth straps. Oh, Lord, is that a stretcher? Up near the grandstand, Boof's mum is handing out bunches of streamers for us to wave when the team runs out. Some of the mothers have made a paper banner on bamboo poles for them to burst through. And here they come, our boys, pounding down the steps and through the narrow gate. They don't see us or know us, and we don't expect them to. And I'm so busy flourishing my streamers and shouting, "Go Colts!" while Newport, in their ominous black, spread out into their positions, that I miss the rending of the banner and see only the Colts' retreating backs and the shreds of blue paper fluttering to the grass on the wind of their passing. The officials in yellow march onto the ground, the umpire holding the ball aloft in one hand on a rigidly vertical arm, the hieratic gesture that for a breathless moment hushes the crowd. The siren, the bounce, the ruckman leap, and my brain, till now sharply focused and registering, stutters, misfires and conks out. The usually thin crowd of Colts supporters is now a dense mob, and it's yelling for its boys. I can't hear anything. I can't think. I can't see. Where's Ambi's dad? I have to get near him or I'm lost. I push along the line until I find him. What's happening? What's happening? This ground, he shouts, is bigger than the one they beat us on. Last time they swamped us, remember? They completely crowded us. We had no room to move. Our fast ones were stopped before they could get going. But this ground's wider. Look, we can run. First quarter, the teams go neck and neck. Quarter time and Newport are 1 point in front, 2019. Half time and we're 2 points ahead, 39-41. I run out to the huddle where my mind still works. The boys' hands plunging into the box of snakes and oranges, their eyes fixed and staring, Ambi with a plug of blood-soaked cotton wool sprouting from his nostril, Archie white-cheeked and tense among the clustered heads as the siren blasts. Back our running power, boys. We can win this if we have the willingness to match their big bodies. This is it, mutters the man at the rail. It'll be the third quarter that decides it. And the Colts are willing. Those big Newport bodies are starting to flag. They're tiring. They're slowing down. And as they falter, the Colts show what they're made of. Is this what footy's for? The pure thing? The point of it?
So much attention, so much emotion, so much attachment to this team and to this activity. But what was one of the things that struck me is that it wasn't always like this. I came across a quote from Monkey Grip, which I thought was something to compare to. From Monkey Grip, "You fucking beauty," bellowed a drunk in a t-shirt, leaning out of a passing car and pointing at my blue and white striped jumper. "They are people who believe in football," said Gracie with disdain. And I think it's nothing to see that was maybe what it was like, but what happened? How did you come to football? And how did you come to football? And how long did it take?
Oh, I can tell because there are certain actual moments that I vividly remember. In the year 2000, when my third and last marriage broke up in Sydney, and I came back to Melbourne kind of with my tail between my legs, and I was a bit miserable and all over the place. And my daughter had called me by this time and said, "Listen, we're having a baby. You can come home now." So I came home, and the thing was that her husband, she'd married this guy who was from St Albans, and he was rusted on Western Bulldogs. And I saw that football was something really huge in their consciousness and lives. And and that it really mattered to them, and my daughter too, who'd like caught the bug. And I thought, oh gosh, if I'm going to hang out with them the way I want to, I'm going to have to find out something about this footy. And I mean, I'd always been aware of footy. I'd never been like against it, in spite of that quote you so. But anyway, so what happened was I rented myself this little house, and I was living over in Ascot Vale all by myself, quite sort of gloomy and sad. And one night I was sitting in my sad little place, and I was watching TV, and I saw a documentary, and it was called The Year of the Dogs. And it was made, I think, quite a way back. But the theme of it was, this happened at the time when the AFL was kind of spreading all over the country, and they were sort of nationalising what used to be the VFL. And so a lot of the sort of not very successful teams, especially certain working class ones, were being amalgamated. And this was terribly... and losing their identity, their identity with their working class suburbs, like Footscray, which of course is the original Western Bulldogs. So I couldn't give a shit about this. You know, I thought, oh well, bad luck for them. You know, that was I could see they were upset about it, but I didn't sort of get it, and I'd never heard of any players and anyway. But I watched this documentary, which is, you can still get it streaming somewhere. Anyway, it exists, and it's a marvellous little documentary. It's about a rather crushed football team who never won anything. They hadn't won a flag since the 50s, and they were tired, but they had these faithful supporters. You know, one of the themes that ran through this movie was that there was two ladies. One of them was an old woman and obviously her daughter, and they went to training every time they were at training, and sometimes they were the only people there, and they'd be sitting in the rain under their umbrellas faithfully watching the team. And the coach was, you know, you see that the players come off the team having been thrashed yet again, and they're just sitting there all muddy and soaked and dripping, and the coach is, you come on, get your shit together, and roaring at them. And I thought, oh God, this is terrible. I don't know if I can stand it. And then they interviewed a guy who many people know the name of Chris Grant, who used to be the captain of the Bulldogs of Footscray, and they said to him, how come you didn't accept the offer to join X, you know, naming some big glamorous team with lots of money? And he said, well, I'll tell you, he said, I got a letter from a little boy, and the letter said, Dear Chris Grant, please don't leave. I haven't got much money. This is all I've got. And he'd sticky taped onto the letter a 50-cent piece. And so Chris Grant just looked, you know, quite seriously, looked at the camera and said, so I couldn't leave, could I? And so I got off the couch and I went straight to the computer and I joined the club. And I was sort of moved by just this simple statement of hope of this child, that it meant so much to him, and of the guy just having that moral response to it. Well, you know, if it meant that much to him, I couldn't let him down, could I? And I just thought the world of him for that.
One thing I think you do that's maybe different to how other artists, writers come towards, say, community activity, is that you do kind of abolish the usual distinction between artist observer and people doing the things they need to do or they enjoy doing. You've never believed, I reckon, in this, well, I'm from some sort of separate group, I have some sort of criticism, I have a basic dislike of a lot of social activity, but we and the separate ones, we will make a better tomorrow. I don't think you've ever believed in that. And one of the things that's so striking in so much of your work is your interest in the labour ward at Penrith, workers at the morgue, the diver in This House of Grief, Diver Caskey. It's really striking because, again, I think one of the ways a writer who starts out feeling separate from the group, you know, protects themselves and sort of, I don't know, survives, is by keeping themselves separate somehow. Do you have a story about why you were never particularly interested in that kind of sensibility?
It's a lonely job being a writer. You know, you sit in a room by yourself for 40 years, and but I have great And I think by nature, rather an introverted. I mean, to sit in a room all day is like my natural state. You know, I like it. I don't feel that I should be out, you know, drinking and laughing. But I envy people with jobs. I remember one time I spent 3 days or 4 or 5 days down at the city morgue watching the work down there, and they were some of the happiest days of my life, where I learnt an enormous amount about things. I saw things I never thought that I would ever see in my life. And I mean, I remember I was talking to one of my sisters and telling her how much I was loving doing this for an article I was going to write. I said, you know, I love it. I walk in the morning and all the technicians are there kind of standing over their corpses, and they say, oh, hi, Helen. Good morning, Helen. And I say, good morning, Kylie. And my sister laughed and she said, what you need is a job. So what I'm getting to is to think this. I have a lot of envy of people that I write about, and I think it comes out a lot in this book.
Yes.
That, I mean, I actually mention it by name. That I loved watching the way the team formed itself into a fighting, actually a team, you know, not just a bunch of kids running about trying to get a kick.
Yeah, you say I could watch this all night.
Yeah,
I could watch them
loved
do their
it.
hand pass drill.
Yeah, I was so moved by it, and just understanding. See, I've never been in a team. Well, I was forced to be in a hockey team when I was at school, and I hated it, and I couldn't get out fast enough. But just sometimes watching the kids arriving, I realised as the team, well, about halfway through the book, halfway through the season, I noticed I started saying we about the team instead of them. And I mean, this happened quite spontaneously, and then I noticed it, and I felt a great loyalty to them and love for them in a way that I hadn't really I don't know what I expected. I just knew that when people would say, oh, hi, Hel, what are you writing? And I'd say, oh, well, I'm writing a book about my grandson's football team. And they'd go, You can see their faces fell. Yeah. And I was supposed to be, well, I suppose if I'd said my granddaughter's football team, then it would have been more approved of. But I think people think, oh, ho-hum, this will be really boring. And I had to, and a lot of blokes I said it to got excited and thought, how fantastic. Well, you know, I know lots about footy and I could tell you anything you need to know. And I was grateful for that, because I had quite a strong ignorance about the finer points of the game. I mean, I've always known, just from watching, I pick up enough to follow a game, you know, with reasonable intelligence. But I'm never going to be one of those people who know when it's the right moment to go ball. You know, I don't even. I sort of know what that means, but I'd be too. What if you shouted out ball and it was the wrong moment, and you were the only one doing it?
In one of the passages you read, what's one of the things that's moving too is that you do get so interested in what it's like for this team to play better and the ways in which you can play better. Yeah. The idea that the bigger ground suits these people for a particular reason, that sort of thing. The other thing that got me was, like what you said then, this idea of being received back into the group. There's a couple of parts where you say if one of the teammates did something wrong, he's absorbed back into the group. You know,
I'm really interested you point that out, because that's what happened was, just to run a little story past, we were playing Werribee Centrals, and it was kind of a pretty rough game, and something happened on the ground, which I was standing right near where it happened, but I couldn't tell what it was. Suddenly, all the boys, they were on the ground, they were tearing at each other and punching each other and trying to tear each other's jumpers off. I go, what the hell? And afterwards, I said to my grandson, what happened? What was that fight? It was a brawl. And he said, I don't know. He said, I'd marked the ball and I was about to go for a torp, and nobody... He went for the torp and missed. Anyway, so that's another story. So what happened was, we pieced it together later, one of the Werribee Central supporters sort of ran out where all the... Because the thing is with kids' sport, there's a rule. The parents aren't allowed to go onto the ground, and that's because, you know, there's some pretty bad stuff that can happen because parents go crazy. So we were all just standing there thinking, what the hell is this about? And one of the Werribee Central's people ran out, and they broke it up. The parents did go in and broke it up. And turns out that one of the Werribee supporters had punched one of our boys, and one of our boys had spat on someone. And this was beyond the pale.
So one of the parents?
No. Well, it took me days to piece it together.
Yeah.
Anyway, it turns out that there's this kid called Silas, who's a terrific player, one of the best players in the team, and this person who'd run out and punched someone. He fired up and got what they call the red mist, and he sort of spat on one of the boys, one of the other team. And so this is very badly seen. I mean, it was more badly seen than a punch. I find that very interesting, that a spit is really beyond the pale, because it's sort of disgusting.
It's more of an insult. You're not even fighting.
It's insulting, yeah.
It's not worth fighting.
Yeah. Anyway, poor Silas. So, of course, the boys didn't give a shit about any of this. They just wanted to keep playing and for the grown-ups to shut up and let's get on with it. But the grown-ups all got upset. And this person was identified. There was this kind of figure who began to be spoken about called the woman in black. And apparently the woman in black had run out of the Werribee supporters, and she had tried to punch in the face one of the Flemington boys. And people going, woman in black, what does that mean? And I'm going, was it someone wearing a black dress or a black coat, or was it someone in hijab, or did she have a black hat? What do you mean, a woman in black? And then people started saying, she wasn't in black, she was a blonde. No, she was definitely a redhead. And everyone had seen a different figure, so nobody could figure out what had happened. So anyway, poor old Silas cops it for having spat. So I hear this and I text the coach, Archie, and I say, hey, most of the time I stood way back. I'd never even met any of the boys or kind of formally been introduced to them or anything right through the whole season. So I said to Arch, can I come and listen when you talk to them about the spit? Or I didn't say the spit. No one used the word spit from then on. They called it the incident. And so he said, yeah, sure, just come and stand up close by. And the thing is that the boys, they acted like I didn't exist. It was total freedom that I had they were not interested in this person with a hat and a dirty old coat. You know, I mean, I had a notebook in my hand and a pencil, and I was writing down what everyone said, and they just didn't even see me. It was just amazing. They would look at me and their eyes would just glaze over. So I came in and I stood right behind the group, and Archie calls them in. He says, oh, come in, boys, come in. And they all come and stand in front of him. And he says, now, one of our boys, he said, I get that you have to stick up for your mates. And it was one of them that started it. But he said, one of our boys did something he shouldn't have, and he's going to be suspended for 2 weeks. And he's one of our best players, and so we've lost him for 2 weeks. And then he says, come on, Silas, come up here and speak to your team. And poor Silas, I mean, you know, he's just a kid. And he stumps out the front and turns around and he goes like this. Sorry. I'd bad choice. I did something I shouldn't have. Sorry, guys. I won't be able to play. And he's sort of looking around helplessly. He goes, but I'll be there supporting you. And then he looks helplessly at the coach, and the coach nods curtly, and he goes back to join the group. And this is the moment you're talking about. And I can't tell you the number of men who've remarked upon this moment to me. And one guy actually choked up and was almost crying on the air when he was interviewing me on the ABC. Or at this moment, he said, I read this bit out to my wife, and he said, oh, I just couldn't help it. I started crying, and I thought, what did I say? And I looked back, and it just said, so Silas stumps back to the group. It opens to accept him. And that's all I said about it. And I felt it too. I felt that moment where he'd done his penance. You know, he's given up 2 weeks. He's let the team down. He's apologised. And the guys in the team don't hold it against him. They accept his remorse. Yeah. But they just opened. You know, the two of them stepped apart, and he stood in his place, and he was back there in the team. And that, I mean, to me, that's kind of mind-blowing. I think that a lot of footy training is a moral training, and it's a training in how to behave decently in situations where you're actually right on the edge of really hurting someone. and which is part of the game, an accepted part of the game. And I sort of really admired the coach for just staging it like that, making it a formal ritual almost.
I thought that was one of the things that drew you to do this, was to watch aggression being protected but also controlled. It's a big deal.
That's well put. And the whole thing about injuries is quite shocking to me. I mean, when I watch the boys playing, I mean, they play without a care. You know, they fling themselves at each other, and you know, Ambrose, I'd be driving him home after training. I went to training twice a week, and that was the thing I loved the most about the whole season, was watching them train. It was like watching an orchestra practicing. You know, they did things over and over and over until they got them right. And kids were urged past their fear and their shyness. And they were urged, well, for example, there's one drill that I loved where they have to shout. And they're running and kicking, and it's a handball thing, and they've got to shout each other's names. I think, why are they shouting like that? And, you know, they'd be going, Jake, 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 Remy, 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 Remy. And I think, what the hell? And all of them were shouting. The whole team were shouting names. And I said to Abby, what's all that shouting about? And he said, well, you know, there are some kids who don't like to shout. They don't like to make a noise. They don't like to... And he said that everybody has to learn to shout, because you have to let the other teammates know you're there. I thought, oh, I get it. Because, you know, when I watch footy, what seems miraculous to me watching it on TV is when you see a pack running at full speed, absolutely full bore, and the person with the ball will suddenly just go like that and flick it to some dude right beside him, and who grabs it. And I just think, oh, God, this is just like being in paradise where everything goes perfectly. And I said to my granddaughter, she used to play footy when she's at uni, and I said, how do they do that? How does he know that someone's there? And she goes, oh, hell, there's a hell of a lot of shouting that goes on out there.
I think this is partly why, when you said you were writing about this, enough people were a bit nonplussed, didn't show immediate enthusiasm, because there's something unfashionable about it. We're supposed to be, in some way, the people who aren't so enthusiastic about team activity, group aggression. We're the ones who are supposed to be teaching people that we might need less of that it's sort of ugly, that a competition is in some ways unnecessary, that we don't want winners or losers. But I was really struck by your idiosyncrasy in saying, I insist these things are beautiful, and I think that, and they do things for us, and this is the key, that nothing else can.
Yeah.
If you get into a contest, it will teach you something and give you something that almost no individual solitary intellectual activity or any kind of activity can give you. You're sort of insisting over and over that only the contest can teach you properly, and we shouldn't get into something, because I think it's a very fashionable idea now, where all contest is somehow ugly. We should be evolving out of it somehow.
Yeah, it's those old hippie ideas from the 70s.
We've done so much work to try and find people who don't do well in a competition, and we've almost got stuck on that side. So to come back the other way and go, you know what the most beautiful thing in the world is? To watch someone win a contest, I think is a strange thing, to get into a literary book.
Yeah. What I realised my son-in-law is a complete footy nut. I mean, he has his radio on all the time when he's cooking and doing things, and he absorbs this massive amount of information about footy, and he understands it and he played when he was younger, and he understands the game in a way that I never will, but he's really good at explaining things. And he used to talk about tackling. And kids love tackling, and that's something about women's footy that I've noticed, how much the women love tackling. It's as if all the sport they'd have ever played didn't involve tackling. You weren't allowed to. That whole aggression was kind of bottled up and somehow muffled. But I'm just watching women's footy. I mean, they go hard. And that really, anyway, let's go there, because that's a whole nother area of thinking, I think. But yeah, I'd say I'd watch my grandson, who in ordinary life is actually a gentle, sweet-natured sort of person, and I'd see him go in there and he'd come off the field and he'd say, "Oh, holy shit, I played really well," and I go, "Good on you, that's really fantastic. I got second best on ground," and he was sort of, I mean, it really meant something. He said, "Did you see my tackle? I dragged him to the ground," and he'd talk like that. And he'd say, "Oh, that kid," he'd show me these scars and wounds all over him. He'd see the elbows with these bloody holes, but he was proud of them. And he'd say, "They're ruckman," and he said he kicked me. He kicked me twice, and so then I turned around and I sat him down. And he said, and after that I was a bit scared because he was a really big, tough bogan. But you know what? The stuff he said to me, he would be aching all over and covered with these bruises and cuts and bloody where people's. It looks like they try to kick each other in the balls, because you could see these big marks from the studs right up the top of the thigh there. Yeah. And I was quite shocked by that. But I said to Amby, those are marks of battle, aren't they? And he said, "Yeah, they are." And I said, "Are you proud of them?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it shows that I've been out there and people have done things to me and I've survived it." And I thought, in a way, that's one of the things that it seemed to me quite a profound insight into why people, boys and men, can tolerate this enormous amount of what we, sort of draw our skirts aside from, as it were.
Yeah. And those passages where you say you'll describe something that happens between, say, the boys in this team, but also AFL players where, and I'm struck by it too, where in ordinary life you never get to, two men never get to leap ecstatically into each other's arms, or there's beautiful things you describe, a man cradling another man's head in both his hands. Again, it strikes me that it's only the contest and the pride that comes from the contest, and then you're on the way to all these other extraordinarily intense emotions, this extraordinary intense pride and affection. And again, it's only the team activity that gets you there.
Yeah, so it seems to be. Well, another thing is that I'm in this reading group I've been in for ages, and it's a group where we read aloud and we read, hard classical things that we're too lazy to read on our own. And so we've read the Iliad, and we've read Virgil and people like that who write about war and violence and battle. And I'm surprised now I'm not surprised because I've learnt it, but I can see the connection between those mighty ideas that are expressed in literature, really high epic literature, how that touches on a sport which is full of violence.
Yeah, I was struck by how all you made them beautiful archaic elements of footy, that literally a trophy, and banners. I mean, there's not many areas of life where you get a trophy. And banners. It occurs to me too that it's been like a long road to here, whereas and I heard you say somewhere that you were struck by how much of a happy book this is. Whereas the earlier books, I thought some of the earlier books, the books of reportage, you were trying to get at this question of how bad our aggression can be and how it should be controlled. I think Joe Cinque, of course, is about that. This House of Grief is about that. Even The Spare Room is about that in a strange way. But back then it was some of the worst possible aggression, and then the most difficult efforts to get control of it, to figure out, and the first stone too, like what should and shouldn't be punished, what should and shouldn't be allowed. But now here, it's almost as if, without making it sound too happy, you've found a way to say that you really can have both. You really can find a way to preserve something primal, and you can be victorious, but over and over you say, yes, but then you can get up and shake somebody else's hand and not hate them.
So that's the thing that amazed me. It just absolutely rocked me. And I feel this always while watching footy. There's just one little incident in the book where when Bailey Smith was playing for the Western Bulldogs, and he headbutted a Geelong player called Zach Tui. He headbutted him there was a brawl on the ground, and he headbutted Zach Tui. And I'd never seen a headbutt ever. And I was sickened by it. It was horrible. It was like watching a snake strike. Suddenly out comes, to hit someone with your own forehead, it's really so violent that I think a woman recoils from it. And, Zach Toohey kind of staggers back like this and his shirt's all ripped into shreds. And so Bailey Smith, like there was a chorus of loud whistles and he copped, I don't know what he got for it. But anyway, they played on. And at the end of the game, at the siren, in the I was watching it on TV, there's a frame, and in the frame there is Zach Toohey walking along with this huge red mark on his forehead where he was headbutted, and he's walking along, he's got his hand out like this. And I'm thinking, can this be what I think it is? And they widen the shot, and he's walking towards Bailey Smith, and Bailey Smith turns towards him, and they go to each other, they shake hands warmly, they embrace, and then they turn aside with their arms around each other's shoulders and walk away laughing. And but when I told this to Archie, the coach, the 20-year-old coach, I told him that story and I said, I was just absolutely gobsmacked by that. And he said, but Helen, that's men.
Which I think is balanced out by the parts in the book where you say, it's interesting, you do say, look, I'm going to insist on telling the most beautiful part of this. I'm not going to deny that there's the ugly part of it. I sometimes thought of Anna Kreen's book, Night Games. If people know that book, it's all about the ugliness. It's all about the worst that happens when men get in a team and how it does take away too much of their individuality in the worst way. And so they'll do things together as the team that are irresponsible or violent that they would never do if they were just by themselves.
Yeah.
That way in which the team
sort of
makes
a gang,
makes
gang
people worse.
thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The team makes people into a kind of gang.
Yeah.
But I thought you had, in a way, like every right to say, I know that, yes, that's true, but I want to show you this other thing that exists as much or more, the beauty of team group. I want to ask you about the choosing the words part, because sometimes I think there could be plenty of books about footy, but this book is different. And why is it different? It's because of certain things you do sentence to sentence, and I was very struck by them this time. I had the phrase in my head was the courage of plainness. One thing I think you do that is rare that other writers don't do is that you can let a plain sentence sit there in a way that is really rather unusual. The first sentence in the book is something like, I pull up at the curb. And I think several hundred other writers would go, in the billowing light with the, right? And to stop and you keep doing it. It strikes me that there's something, it really is rare. And it struck me that it must be you must have fought for that technically, not to then produce a couple of phrases on top of it.
Yeah, well that means a lot to me. I feel as if in writing you should have the fewest possible number of words on the page. And that doesn't mean that I won't read a long book, because sometimes a long book is required. But a very useful thing a bloke said to me once, Helen, this was way back when I'd just done my second book, he said, you use too many adverbs. And I thought, how dare you? I shall use as many adverbs as I like, but no, he was absolutely right. And I went back and I looked at the book he was talking about, or the story, and it was sprinkled with unnecessary adverbs. I mean, you would trip over them. She said angrily. He looked at her lovingly. All those words that end in ly. I mean, there should be a little red flag that comes on every time. You can use them, but
they're not adding.
But they're not adding anything. No, it's kind of lazy writing, because if you're doing, you can't just draw out one phrase. Everything's densely knotted into its pattern that gives the meaning of what you're doing. And so for you to have to tell the reader the tone of voice in which a person says something, it means you haven't given, the dialogue itself is not properly done. You leave the adverb off and go back and, yeah.
And then I noticed, though, that it's not just that. Again and again, you will supply 2 or 3 more words giving detail in a sentence. And I think you almost want to set up a class for young writers and go, okay, notice. So many times that I think a more ordinary writer would say they sat on the grass. You'll insist on the dry grass, or there's a couple of examples where you'll just provide, you hoist yourself up onto the curved bench, not I sat on the bench. And I think that's, if you do that hundreds of times, there's something, obviously it makes it more real, but it also gives us that thing I tried to talk about at the start, which is that we're in secure hands, that you're going to be noticing enough. So in a sense, we can both relax, but also get ready for any more difficult information.
Well, that's my aim, is for the reader to be relaxed but alert. Just if you, I should put that at the front.
Yeah. You take it off when you start the book.
Yeah, but look, the very most basic thing you can hope for is that the reader is still awake at the end of the book.
I mean, the sort of bit boring question is, how self-consciously do you work for that? Do you think...
Oh, I work like a dog for that.
Yeah.
I do.
And you'll have a conscious sense of, all right, 2 more for the grass.
Yeah.
How did I get on the bench? Because the verbs do so much work, and the verbs are so good.
I was going to say, the verbs. I'm big on verbs. They can do a hell of a lot of work. The other thing I'm always trying to do is I'm trying to stay as close as I can to spoken language, to speech.
Yes.
And so that necessarily makes you chop off all sorts of ludicrous flourishes that would otherwise get in the way. Well, see, when I'm working, I read everything out loud to myself. Like if I've written half a page, I'll go back and read it out loud. And the bits that don't need to be there, they just put their hands up and say, kill me.
I was thinking when I read of a friend of mine who I once saw give a talk, and I was really struck by how completely unlike himself he was on the page and when he delivered this writing. And I thought how many people that happens to, where they, as soon as they become a writing person, they abolish most of their personality. And I know you have to do that in a professional setting, but I'm so struck by the way you don't do that. You take in all the registers, the lower register, but then you're also not afraid of the most literary or lyrical register. I think you must be one of the writers who includes the most vernacular with the most lyrical. I was really struck by the phrase. Well, it's rare to have them both so strongly at the same time. I was struck by the phrase, chucked an illegal Yui. And then thinking of the German translator who'll probably have to... But then you'll also give us the ethereal mineral glow of a skyscraper at sunset. And again, I wondered how self-conscious you are about... The thing that's interesting to me is the permission to write Australian vernacular. You've always done it. And it should be maybe something people can do, but people don't do it. They don't think you can write that sentence, chuck an illegal Yui. That's not writing.
Well, yeah. Well, that's really interesting. See, I never felt that I was going to get published in any other country. I never had the ambition to be published anywhere else. I thought, okay, I'm just going to write about here, and I'm going to write for people who are going to know what I'm talking about. So if I say I got on my bike and I rode down Lygon Street, I don't want to have to say which is the main street running through Carlton, and there's a... and I realised when Monkey Grip came out, one thing happened, a lot of people would say, oh, I really loved the fact that you talked about places that I know, where I live. And I love that feeling. I love the feeling that people, you can draw people into a story just by saying the MCG or, just naming.
And something to do with the way the highfalutin men did it, where they thought they had to be so English literary. Yeah. I get the sense you were surrounded by that at the start of the career, where the people were trying to run from Australia as fast as they can.
Yes, people wanted to get out of here. And see, I didn't feel like that. I loved it. And when I'm out of Australia, I'm just so homesick, I can't stand it. And I thought, well, okay. So lately, I've been very surprised to find that those diaries that I published have been published in the United States and in the UK, and I'm getting all these fantastic reviews, and I'm thinking, what? I'm 82. You left it this late?
I saw just the other day that all the diaries are being published in hardback together in the United States, as is the season. Yeah. So they're going to get a load of chuck an illegal Yui over there. Yeah. Just have to put up with it. The reason I think, when you work with those verbs in the way you do, that I hauled myself up, I always think part of the reason for that emphasis is your insistence that a body is doing things. That one of the several things that does is this sense of you're always there doing ordinary things, blowing your nose, sitting with all of yourself. You never edit out. I think one of the ways a more literary language can edit out all of the sweating feet and arms, blowing your nose side of being a person. Again, like, and of course it went so extraordinarily well this time because you're describing so much physical activity, but you never forget your own physicality in anything you write and report. I think that's part of what makes you different to the others as well.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
Because again, like, good writing is supposed to be, I'm not going to mention that I blew my nose.
Yeah, well, that might come from the years of keeping a diary, you know, when you're talking just to yourself in a diary, and you can talk about all sorts of things that maybe, yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. But what I've noticed too is there are two boys in the team called Tom and Ned. They're brothers, and their mum, who I got friendly with, she told me that I'd go, and they had a copy of the book in the house, so Tom and Ned's grandmother came into the kitchen, saw the book lying there, and she opened it up at page 1 and started reading it, and she started to cry. And Tom and Ned's mum said to her mother, "What are you crying for?" She says, "Nothing's happened yet." And the grandmother says, "But it's what I know." And I thought, oh, that sort of blew my mind. I think, that links up with, saying I rode my bike down Lygon Street, just to accept that you live in this place and that the things that are important to this place are important to you. I feel that I've got more and more like that as I've got older, and probably through having grandchildren and going through all that again, watching them grow up and being with them, watching them know the world. I feel that's one of the great privileges of my life, that I've lived with my grandchildren right from their birth on. Right, we all lived in the same house, yeah.
And that is all we have time for. We are coming up to 11 o'clock, but it's not a bad place to stop. And I want to thank you on behalf of everybody for writing this book and for being here today.
Thank you.
Everybody, please thank Helen Garner.
Clunes Booktown Festival is presented by Creative Clunes. Tax-deductible donations to keep our stories alive can be made at creativeclunes.org.au. This podcast has been made possible due to the generous support of the Hugh Williamson Foundation.